And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith was one of the leading jazz keyboardists of his time. He was also one of the pioneers of the use of the electric organ in jazz in the 50s and the 60s. He grew up in Philadelphia and graduated from the Hamilton School of Music. After being inspired to take up electric organ playing by Wild Bill Davis, one of the early keyboardists in jazz, Smith set out as an organist himself. He started out with Blue Note Records, stealing the spotlight with amazing albums like The Champ and the incredible Jimmy Smith at Club Baby Grand. In 1963, he switched to Verve Records. His very first album for Verve Records, Bash, The Unpredictable Jimmy Smith, became a massive success. One of the tracks from the album, Walk on the Wild Side, became a chart-topping classic. In 1972, he started out solo, performing at local concerts in California. In 2004, Smith was awarded the Jazz Master Award by the National Endowments for the Arts. So that was a quick recap of the life and times and best hits of Jimmy Smith. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Jimmy Smith was one of the leading jazz keyboardists of his time. He was born on December 8, 1925 in Pennsylvania. His family were from musical background and he started taking music lessons at age 6. By his early teens, he had become an accomplished keyboardist and had won several local talent contests. He graduated from the Hamilton School of Music and Ornstein School in Philadelphia. In 1951, he was performing at a local concert alongside his father when he heard Wild Bill Davis playing the Hammond B3 organ. Bill was also a pioneer of the instrument and Jimmy Smith immediately took a liking to it. He started learning the art of playing the Hammond B3 over the next few years and started out playing professionally in clubs in Philadelphia in 1955. In 1956, he debuted at the famous Harlem Jazz Club in New York City, and his talents were noticed by Alfred Lyon, who ran Blue Note Records. He started out with Blue Note Records, stealing the spotlight with amazing albums like Champ and the incredible Jimmy Smith at Club Baby Grand. In 1963, he switched to Verve Records. His very first album for Verve Records, Bash, The Unpredictable Jimmy Smith, became a massive success. One of the tracks from the album, Walk on the Wild Side, became a chart-topping classic. He had a busy recording schedule throughout the 60s and in 1966 he had an iconic collaboration album alongside Wes Montgomery. In 1972 he started out solo, performing at local concerts in California. In the early 80s he returned to the jazz scene on Milestone Records, producing more great albums. One of his notable performances was a live duet alongside fellow keyboardist Joey DeFrancisco. In 2004, Smith was awarded the Jazz Master Award by the National Endowment of the Arts. He died in 2008, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest organists in jazz. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith, his life and times and best hits. Now it's time for some trending promo news. Australian jazz artist Julie O'Hara is out with a new album release, All in the One Room, on Jazzspell Records. Julie is a rising star from Australia, a vocalist, composer and improviser. Critics have said of her that Julie O'Hara's music deserves to be left to linger in the air, to be swayed to and to be absorbed. The album All in One Room showcases her amazing scat singing, phrasing and compositional skills. The album fuses Latin, bop, blues and swing and features 13 mesmerizing tracks. Tracks like Keeping It Solid, All in the One Room, Joy's Universe and more. The compositions in the album stem from years of experience improvising and composing. Also, this album shines the spotlight on Julie's love of scat singing or mimicking musical instruments with her voice after the style of other great scat singers like Betty Carter, Mark Murphy and Sheila Jordan. There's also some great solo performances from her bandmates, Steve Sedergreen on piano, Edward York on drums, Mark Elton on bass and guests Anton DeLaca on tenor saxophone and Eamon McEllis on trumpet. So this album basically is a fusion of diverse musical landscapes and is now available on all streaming platforms. For more information, please visit julieohara.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Jimmy Smith's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first one's called Back at the Chicken Shack, released in 1963. This one's a great compilation of jazz organ music. The album was the work of some up-and-coming jazz instrumentalists who went on to make waves. Also, this album paved the way for future organists in the use of the Hammond B3 organ. Jimmy Smith was one of the early pioneers of the instrument in jazz. House Party is the next album. This one was released in 1958, and this one's a great album full of individual solo pieces from Jimmy and his band, names like Lee Morgan, Tina Brooks, Kenny Burrell, George Coleman and more. Some of the standout tracks: Opera Wave, the title track, Lover Man and Blues After Dark. And Roots Down, released in 1972. This is one of his best albums from his latter years. So this album was recorded alongside a band of up-and-coming artists. Many of them were funk and rock artists. They provide a great backdrop for Smith's low-cut grooves. So that was some insight into what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Back at the Chicken Shack, released in 1963. This one's a great compilation of warm, relaxing tracks. It's also suitable for any occasion, from listening to music by the fireside to partying. A great compilation of jazz organ music. The album was the work of some up-and-coming jazz instrumentalists who went on to make waves: tenor saxophonist Stanley Tarantine, guitarist Kenny Burrell, and long-standing friend of the drums, Donald Bailey. There's a beautiful backdrop of instrumental music, the perfect complement for Smith's soft, nostalgic organ music. This was one of his best albums and made it to the top of the charts. And Jimmy Smith's playing also shines a spotlight on the Hammond B3 organ, which until he popularized it was not frequently used in jazz. Notable exceptions included Bill Davis and Louis Jordan. In fact, Downbeat magazine once termed the organ an irrelevant instrument, but all that changed after Jimmy Smith brought the instrument into the spotlight. So now about the music. There's two original compositions by Smith. One of them's called Messy Bessie, featuring some great saxophone and guitar melodies. There's Back at the Chicken Shack, which is all about grooves and blues. Tarantine famously launched his career with one of the tracks on this album, the song Minor Chant. Smith is probably best on the Oscar Hammerstein hit When I Grow Too Old to Dream. So overall, this album is one of his best works, also paved the way for future organists in the use of the Hammond B3 organ. Among them, Charles Earland, Richard Groove Holmes, Jack McDuff, John Patton, Johnny Hammond Smith, and Lonnie Smith. The next album is called House Party, released in 1958. This one's a great compilation full of individual solo pieces from Jimmy and his band, names like Lee Morgan, Tina Brooks, Kenny Burrell, George Coleman, and others. Lou Donaldson gives us some lightning-paced tenor saxophone solos on a Charlie Parker classic, Or Prevail. Jimmy, Tina, and Burrell add some fluid backdrop instrumentals. The title track is a memorable melody. It's all about partying, and it's one of the standout tracks on this album. Lover Man is a beautiful romantic track, driven by Donaldson on sax backed by Smith's organ music. A similar track, Just Friends. On this track, all the band members get a chance to solo individually. And Blues After Dark, a soulful and sublime bop masterpiece. Root Down was released in 1972. So, as he progressed, Jimmy Smith became less unpredictable in his style of playing. He'd play with a variety of musicians, but his style became more niche. His playing was more inclined to be organic and laid back, relaxed and funky. So many of his albums are in that style, with the exception of Root Down, one of his best albums from his latter years. For example, on the title track, his playing is raw and energetic. This album was recorded alongside a band of up-and-coming artists: Art Adams on guitar, Buck Clark on percussion, Paul Humphrey on drums, and Milton Felder on electric bass. Many of them were funk and rock artists. They provide a great backdrop for Smith's low-cut grooves, especially on songs like Sag Shooting His Arrow and Root Down. The result is a combination of fast-paced and slow-paced songs. The pace is unstoppable and it's full of twists and turns. Also, some highlights from the backdrop instrumentals: the percussion is great, the drum sounds are very dynamic, and the guitar playing is very refreshing. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Jimmy Smith, his life and times and best hits. Now it's time for some trending concert news. The New Jersey Performing Arts Center is one of the biggest performing arts centers in the US. Every day it hosts great performances and concerts. From January to June this year, the Performing Arts Center is hosting a special jam session featuring some of the top jazz talent from New Jersey, in a concert series called Jazz Jams at Clements Place. The concerts are directed by pianist and band leader James Austin Jr. The concert promises some relaxing jazz music to immerse oneself in, stimulating minds all around. Also, novice and veteran jazz musicians are invited to jam with the bands throughout the night's festivities. The concert's taking place every third Thursday of the month at 7:30 p.m. Here's a quick insight into some of the upcoming acts. January 16th sees vocalist Alicia Rennie taking the stage with Ben Rubens on bass and Jeremy Warrens on drums. On February 20th, it's James Austin Jr. alongside the Luminescence Band. The festival is taking place in Clements Place, Rutgers University in New Jersey. For more information, please visit www.njpsc.org. So that was some trending festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Jimmy Smith's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.